Wouldn't it be nice to have several thought leaders in your industry know and love your brand? Start a podcast. Invite your industry's thought leaders to be guests on your show, and start reaping the benefits of having a network full of industry influencers. Learn more at sweetfishmedia.com.
You're listening to B2B Growth, a daily podcast for B2B leaders. We've interviewed names you've probably heard before, like Gary Vaynerchuk and Simon Sinek, but you've probably never heard from the majority of our guests. That's because the bulk of our interviews aren't with professional speakers and authors. Most of our guests are in the trenches leading sales and marketing teams. They're implementing strategy. They're experimenting with tactics. They're building the fastest growing B2B companies in the world. My name is James Carberry. I'm the founder of Sweetfish Media, a podcast agency for B2B brands, and I'm also one of the co-hosts of this show. When we're not interviewing sales and marketing leaders, you'll hear stories from behind the scenes of our own business. We'll share the ups and downs of our journey as we attempt to take over the world. Just kidding. Well, maybe. Let's get into the show.
Welcome to the B2B Growth Podcast. I am your host for the H2H, Human to Human segment, Carlos Hidalgo, founder and CEO of Vism CX. And I am absolutely delighted to talk today to my dear friend, colleague, confidant, someone I learn a lot from every time we chat, Brian Carroll, CEO and founder of Markempa. Brian, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me, Carlos.
So, Brian, for our listeners, I know you very well. I've had the good fortune of knowing you for a number of years now and building a great friendship and being, each other's sounding boards on many fronts. But give a little background on who you are, some intro, and let our listeners know just who Brian Carroll is.
Sure. So I've spent more than 20 years really focused on how do we acquire and grow customer relationships. It started out with me being a sales development rep right out of the University of Minnesota. And so my very first job actually was ironically selling sales training, and which I knew nothing about sales, which is irony. And so quickly after that, I thought, I seem to know a little bit about this. And I started my own company after getting passed over for a supervisor job. Ironically, someone had an MBA, and I thought without even having a bachelor's yet, was just as qualified for the job. So I got upset. I started my own company. And we started providing lead generation services, grew quickly. And, in a series of 5 years, we became a Inc. 500 company for fast growth. And I sold my company to Mech Labs, who owns Marketing Sherpa and long respected Marketing Sherpa, and just had this great opportunity for almost 10 years to work at Mech Labs, running sales marketing. And I started feeling that entrepreneurial bug again. I had a new marriage. I just wanted to try something new on my own. And so you and I talked way back 2016, this idea of empathy. And I've been this lead generation guy. So applying empathy to lead generation, we could talk a little bit more about that story. But I started Markempa with this premise that we aren't thinking machines that feel, we're feeling machines that think. And we have so many ways of connecting, reaching customers than ever before, but we never really connect with them because it's just so hard to actually reach people. And so that's where empathy comes in, and Markempa does that. We help companies create emotional connections with customers, and ultimately from that, when we have better connection, what we want as marketers to have better conversion. So that's what I focus on now today.
Yeah, I remember the early days of those conversations, and I was so intrigued. So I totally hear you. I think any one of us as consumers, just as people, we feel good when someone applies empathy to our situation. And so I think in talking about this with yourself and others, what I hear a lot is, hey, I understand that in the consumer world, in the B2C world, but why is this so important that we as marketers and salespeople, and you could probably extend even into like customer support, why is that so important for us in our B2B context?
Well, I think really at the heart, marketing is about communicating a message. But the challenge is we have all these channels and ways of reaching people. Actually, connecting with our customers in a way that's meaningful has never been
Hmm.
harder. And so you may already know what your audience needs, and you know that they need what you have to offer. But I'm sure some of your listeners are finding your messages aren't connecting, and so you may have tried everything from expert recommendations or best practices, or we read about a new tool or new innovation. But deep down, why empathy matters is that our customers are deluged, overwhelmed. They're dealing with so much, and they're just sensitive to being manipulated. And a lot of marketing today is around coercion. We're creating
Hmm.
false scarcity. We're using tips and tools from behavioral economics. And so, from the customer's perspective, what they really want is someone who understands them. And so that's what empathy allows us to do is in the end, it's understanding the deeper motivations of what's driving our customers. And in B2B, this is just as important as B2C because the stakes are higher. Jobs are on the line, there's more money involved. And so when someone makes a bad decision, it could not only impact their company, it could impact their team, it could impact their job. So that's why so many people have a hard time with the idea of empathy is that they've been doing marketing based on what everyone's recommended, but there's that human aspect of what's going to matter and connect that just seems to get ignored because we're so distracted by what we're trying to get done.
Yeah, so you mentioned something about the stakes being higher, and I'm very interested in this because I talk about, we don't sell to with ABM being all the rage, and I'm not saying ABM isn't effective, but we kind of get locked into this, oh, we sell to accounts, almost like we're going up to these brick and mortar buildings and
Right.
selling into that, but we actually sell to people. So, but you mentioned the stakes are higher, people could lose their jobs. Can you drill into that a little bit more? Like, how do you
Sure.
tap into that human emotion or even that fear of what's going to happen if I make a mistake?
I can. So buying involves change. And as we all know, change is hard. And so
Hmm.
the way that I like it, we talk a lot about journeys, and I really see the journey of a customer. It's like a challenge. Their journey is they got to just they have a mountain in front of them. It requires change, and not only that, you have group dynamics. So you have people who also have to go on this journey with you. Some of them don't even want to climb the mountain, or others want to go up a different mountain. And what is happening is the dynamics of why it's so risky is that getting people to agree who have different motivations, and even two people in the car. Fortunately, we have GPS, but we don't have that when it comes to buying. You have so many choices and decisions. And so for companies, they got to say, is it even worth it? Is it worth going through the pain? Is it worth trying to get my team aligned around this change? Because getting our own organizations to do things, even when it's the right thing, isn't easy because it involves change. And when it's going to impact not only your job, but other people's jobs, there's other motivators like how will my team feel about this? Will I be more respected?
Hmm.
Will this impact my career? How will this influence my boss? So all these dynamics are happening. And as marketers, if we just focus on a single person or we think of the account and we aren't looking at all these people need to go on a journey and unwittingly we can create points of disagreement with our content, with our marketing, with our sales approach. And what we need to do is create places for people to agree so they're moving together. Half our job really, I think, is being helping people emotionally regulate to go through the changes because they can be happy, this is exciting, to despair, like, oh, do I even want to bother?
Right. Yeah. And I definitely, I think we as consumers too, I know for me, any big ticket purchase, even if it's something you need, as soon as you sign on that slip or hand over your cash, there's that instant fear or feeling of buyer's remorse of, wow, that was a mighty big check that I just signed to buy this thing. did I really need that? And I think we experience that in the B2B, and that's kind of what I'm tapping into when I hear the word despair. So knowing that, I think it's safe to assume that sending email after email after email saying, hey, did you get my first email, is not the way to sell or market effectively. So, what are some tangible things that marketing and salespeople can do? You've mentioned content, but what are
Yeah.
some of the other things they can do to truly demonstrate empathy at that account level, knowing that they have most likely multiple stakeholders involved in this process?
Well, I'll come at it from the perspective of for marketers, it's getting out with your sales team and talking about the experience and the steps of what your customer goes through. So what I find is journey maps are built, and anyone can do a journey map. The thing is it really grounded based on the reality of the customer. And what I
Mm.
find is that marketers get isolated from the customers they're influencing, and so they're just getting ad libbed or ad hoc feedback from sales. So I would say be intentional. You have so much data and insight about your customers and your organization right now. It's probably just in silos because someone's not asking the right questions. And two, there's not a dynamic of that information sharing. So I would say focus on mapping out the journey of your customer. The second thing I would say is get your internal silos brought down through the communication around the journey of your customer. What are the questions they ask? What are the emotions that they're dealing with? What are the common issues and problems, that they deal with where things get stuck? Also find out what helps them get unstuck. There's all
Hmm.
these insights we can learn. The second thing I would say is actually talk to your customer. And it could be as simple as talking to your 10 most recent customers who purchased, and to go and ask them, we want to help improve the buying journey for others who have gone through the experience just like you. And I'd love to interview you, and I'd love to hear the story. Like, what caused you to first start looking at, and whatever it is you sell, if it's work automation software, what first caused you to look at it? And then what happened? And so interviewing your customer about what they went through, you're going to learn three things: what they did, you're going to learn the questions they asked. And I also find that when you really tune in and you're listening to the deeper insight, and this is the third thing, using empathetic listening, which is listening deeper, not to just what's being said, but what's motivating. What's the motivation behind what's being said? This is what therapists use. They call it third ear listening, but you're trying to
Hmm.
listen to deeper. What's the emotional context behind what's being said?
So,
And
so Brian, let me jump in real quick, and I apologize for cutting you off. But when you talk about listening deeper, is that really trying to? I mean, is it even appropriate to say to, if you hear something from a customer, say, "Hey, could you? What's really behind that statement?" So, are you things like, are you getting pressure from your boss? Is it the end of a budget cycle? Are you? Because I think sometimes buyers approach this, or even customers, even with brands, very rarely have I, in my 20 plus years, found a customer who says, I'm just going to lay it all on the table. Is that kind of what you're getting at?
yeah, exactly. And so as someone shares, I'll give you an example. A recent interview, and I often help clients interviewing customers to fill in the gap where they're trying to rapidly figure out things. So one person I talked to, she said, you know, I brought in this software because I knew I needed it, but I had to work with three bosses. And I was like, three bosses? And she said,
Mm.
yes, I had three different managers this year. And I said, wow, that sounds like that'd be pretty frustrating. And she said, exactly. It was frustrating. And not only that, I felt this pressure. And so what was pressuring you? I asked. And she said, because I knew I would need to hire another person, but if I could just use what I already had, I wouldn't have to do that. I didn't have the budget. And so things weren't getting done. So we learned things about what the emotion was, but it required me to actually name it. And
Mm.
for the director of marketing interviewed, for her then to say yes. So that's part of what I'm talking about. That deeper listening is sometimes it just means you're helping someone name the emotion, because
Hmm.
we often aren't consciously aware of how we feel. And that's where, when you're tuned into someone, you can test that out. You can hear it in our voice. Am I smiling? Am I frustrated?
Right.
A lot of that comes through in how someone sounds. And even better, if you see it on video, you can start seeing micro expressions as well.
Interesting. So I guess the real question for me is how do you teach this? Because I encounter, and I've just had two even in the last 2 weeks, where salespeople, they are so focused in on their script. They are, it's like truly they believe, well, I have my sales process, buying process be damned. And it is so frustrating to try to navigate that, or even with a customer support rep where it's, you're saying, well, no, I really, and I actually had this conversation last week. I said, I don't think you're hearing what I'm trying to say. So how do companies teach that, or can it even be taught? Because you've mentioned change management and things like that. So it doesn't seem like this is an overnight shift at all.
It can be taught, but also I found that it requires people to feel freedom to do it. So just, really quick, we haven't spent a lot of time talking about neuroscience. I'm not a neuroscientist, but I have spent time learning just how our brain works and our emotions. So what I mean by freedom is a lot of marketers are driven by pressure and anxiety. And what happens in our brain is our amygdala is getting activated. It's when that happens, it's fight or flight. And so we start focusing. It's interesting. When our amygdala is activated, we're in survival mode. We become more sociopathic. How do I get my needs met? And so, what would you do if you weren't afraid? What would you do if you didn't feel pressure? And so
Mm-hmm.
that's what our job as leaders to do, is to help create space and safety for people to fail, to try new things. I just interviewed someone about innovation, and that's one of the things for people to innovate, they actually need to feel it's okay. And the other thing is when someone feels safe, then we're more in our cerebral cortex, and that's where collaboration exists. That's where empathy exists. That's where
Mm.
other centeredness exists. So what I find is there's this self-awareness. And if you work in an organization where that doesn't feel possible, you still can do your own work in becoming more mindful. I would say tactically, you can apply empathy. And there's actually a great book that I'm currently reading, and it's the best non-sales book that I've read recently. It's called Never Split the Difference. It was written by an FBI lead terrorist negotiator, and he
Hmm.
teaches a method called tactical empathy. And literally, they needed to figure out that getting to yes, which is what we're trying to do when we're doing
Mm-hmm.
marketing and selling, that all the skills, literally, there was a book written called Getting to Yes. Turns out that was teaching a if then type of negotiation. And what you need to do instead is just be more emotionally connected. And so he Never Split the Difference teaches about this idea of tactical empathy. But even though it wasn't written for sales, I think everyone in sales and marketing should check that book out, because you will come away understanding how to better connect and relate to other people.
Well, it's interesting. Years and years ago, over 20 years ago, I took a sales training course. And the instructor, who I still keep in touch with, said this whole idea that people buy from people they like, he said, is not true. He said, people buy from people they relate to.
Yes.
And, at that point, I was, mid 20s. So, of course, I knew everything already. um, but that has stuck with me in that. And I think what he was really saying is people buy from people that they feel empathy from. And I
Totally.
think sometimes where we get confused is we think of empathy, and I've heard people say this, like, so what am I supposed to do? Just go in and rub their back and tell them it's all going to be okay? And I'm like, no, we're not asking for sympathy, but, and correct me if I'm wrong, you're more the expert on this than I am, but it's more of just recognizing and affirming where they're at, and then also providing something that we can help them with. And I think, and I'm curious to your opinion on this. How important is it to even call out the areas where we know we can't help and be very honest and upfront about that?
It's so important, and I'm glad you brought it up, Carlos, is that when we admit, in effect, our weaknesses or we aren't strong, it takes everything else we say and makes them more credible. And
Mm,
I think to the customer, why is it that we try to get reviews from other customers? Because we want honest feedback, right? We want, and so when someone is vulnerable and says, I don't have the answer to it, or in my case, I learned my first experience of this when I was an inside sales rep in my first job selling sales training. And I hadn't got an appointment in 2 weeks and I was paid per appointment. And so I was feeling
yeah.
this pressure. Anyway, Julie, who was my manager, said, Brian, stop you're 22 years old, stop trying to sound like you're important and following the script as I'm relating to VPs of sales. She said, just be people with people. And I was like,
Hmm.
what do you mean? And she said, just be yourself. And so I started calling and saying, hey, I'm Brian. I'm 22. This is my first sales job. I'm really excited. I'm learning a lot about sales. And it was interesting when I started opening up that, I was excited about learning and other things. And then I connect to that person. I became more real,
Hmm.
in the sense that here I am selling sales training, just learning about it myself. And so there was this aspect of, I remember after doing that day I got 3 appointments after 2 weeks of not getting any. And
Right.
it was because I could connect to someone, and there was that vulnerability.
That's an awesome story. I love that. So we have a few minutes left. For the people who are listening. What are maybe one or two tangible steps? You mentioned the tactical
Yeah,
empathy. What are some other things they can do? Like stop listening to the podcast and take the next few days and start
sure.
doing this to drive towards that more empathetic approach.
I think right now we talked a lot about email, and so many emails I get are not empathetic, and they're
Hmm.
very focused on the company, the customer. So there's what I would say is look at your email, and there's 3 questions you could ask. One, are you more focused on the customer, or is it focused on you in terms of you? Who's this focused on? Who's in effect the hero of the story as you're connecting.
Hmm.
The second thing is, are you being emotionally resonant? Are you connecting with an emotion someone's experiencing? So, quick example, an email, a sales driven one was, hey, you stopped filling out our form and we really would like to get you a demo to, hey, I noticed that you stopped filling out the form. And was it because you were worried about getting called by multiple salespeople or high pressured sales tactics? We just wanted your phone number so we could be available to answer questions. And so
Right.
there's just a big difference in that. And the third thing is just looking at relevance. I get emails from people where they know what my role is and what I do, but it's not remotely connected to what would be of interest to me. So are you sending blanket nurturing emails that go out to everyone on your list, but it's not looking at what role, what industry they're in? And this is just simple table stakes stuff. But what I find is that to be relevant to someone, is it focused on me and what's happening in my situation? And so when I look at any communication, this empathy index looks at 4 things, you know, customer focus, emotional resonance, relevance, and then clarity. Is it clear? And so you can apply these 4 dimensions to any marketing message, and from that, be more empathetic rapidly.
I love that. I love that. So if people want to continue a conversation with you, Brian, check you out or just follow you, where can they find you?
You can go to Markempa, so that's marketing and empathy combined. So markempa.com. And we got free resources and tools there. And then you can certainly find me on LinkedIn or Twitter as well. And or you can just email me at brian@markempa.com.
Awesome. And I know I will give a plug. I know you're working on some educational material, you're working on a book. So there's going to be a lot more to come from you on this all too important topic of empathy in B2B marketing. Brian, thank you so much for the time. I know you're a busy man, and This has been great. I could talk about this stuff and nerd out with you for a long time on
Thanks so much, Carlos.
on B2B marketing and empathy. But thank you so much. And to our listeners, I hope you all have a great day. Thank you for listening to the H2H Human to Human segment for the B2B Growth podcast.
We totally get it. We publish a ton of content on this podcast, and it can be a lot to keep up with. That's why we've started the B2B Growth Big Three, a no-fluff email that boils down our 3 biggest takeaways from an entire week of episodes. Sign up today at sweetfishmedia.com/big3. That's sweetfishmedia.com/big3.